Can you hear me now? Can you hear me now, Jason? Hello?
You have to turn your sound down, remember, Lisa?
That better?
Getting really bad feedback loop.
Yeah, turn sound up.
I turned mine down.
So I'll turn mine out now. Try it again.
Who's testing it?
No, I still hear feedback.
Jason, can you hear me? Good. Hello?
Oh, that's coming out of your speaker.
Now I'm down to 0, but it's typically my speaker that you want on. And the city clerk's off. Or might just leave it on.
Still getting that.
Because this is down, but this one's got to stay up, right?
Is this one down?
It shouldn't be.
Hello,
because
hello.
volume has to be up on this one, right?
Hi. Hi.
Hello.
You hear that delay?
Mm-hmm.
Well, the delay is YouTube.
Hello?
Hello.
Hi, we're just checking sound here.
You hear that? There's some loop. It's looping it. That's why we're getting the feedback.
It's gotta be a YouTube.
We gotta kill the stream. I gotta switch back if I can.
I did mention that the recording has started, but we are making sure that we have solid recording going on before we begin. We good? Okay. Can you hear me now? Can you hear the sound, Jason? Almost done. Thank you for your patience, council. As I said, we want to make sure that we are recording correctly and that we have the proper audio. So appreciate your patience. All right. All right, if we are good, then I will, let's see, do we have 1, 2, 3, 4? We have 4 council members. Now we have 5. Okay. All right, good evening. We will call the special meeting of the Auburn City Council to order for September 16th, 2020. Per the governor's emergency proclamation 20-28, the city of Auburn is prohibited from holding an in-person meeting at this time. City of Auburn resolution number 5533 designates City of Auburn meeting locations for all council, board, and commission meetings as virtual. All meetings will be held virtually and telephonically until King County Phase 3 of Governor Inslee's Safe Start, Washington's phased reopening plan. At this time, Teresa, will you please call roll?
Deputy Mayor DeCoursey.
Here.
Councilmember Baggett. Councilmember Baggett.
I'm not sure.
Councilmember Brown.
Here.
Councilmember Jiraj.
I'm here.
Councilmember Malinga.
Excused.
Councilmember Stearns.
Here.
Councilmember Trout Manuel.
Here.
All right, so this is the third of 3 budget meetings, the 2021-2022 biennial budget discussion, and I will turn it over to Finance Director Thomas for tonight's presentation.
Thank you, Mayor. We are in the home stretch. I'm going to start sharing my screen to pull up our presentation for this evening. And it is not popping up. Well, I'm going to do my backup method, which is just share the PowerPoint presentation instead of the PDF file. And I'm going to jump straight to page 43. I apologize. All right. For workshop number 3, I have an item in there for any of the follow-up items from workshop number 2. We'll go over those. Then we're going to jump right back into our internal service fund reviews. Leaving off, if you recall, we ended up with our IT fund last night. We will be hearing from equipment rental and replacement fund, the facilities, multimedia, workers' compensation, and insurance internal service funds as a follow-up to that. We'll review our general governmental capital activities. Then we will look at our proprietary funds, which includes cemetery, water, sewer, storm, and metro charges, our airport, our solid waste fund, our fiduciary funds at the very end, and then we'll wrap up with our next steps and what council's role is going to be from here on out. So with that, as a follow-up from our workshop number 2, I think I got everything to the group from last night. There was some question about the total medical costs citywide. I sent that to all of you in an email, as well as some salary increase information, a follow-up to Councilmember Malanga's question about salary increases and COLAs. And then I had also attached the presentations from the first 2 workshops. There was an outstanding question from Councilmember Trent Manuel about what would be classified as an other category and the business and occupation tax reporting categories. I have yet to find an example. I haven't reached out yet to any of our neighboring cities. I was going to reach out to Kent and see if they could give us some good examples of some businesses they have in their other category. I just haven't had an opportunity to do that quite yet. So with that, I'm going to pass the presentation over to Director Gaub to talk about the Equipment Rental and Replacement Fund.
Good evening. So tonight we're going to continue talking about public works on several different levels, but for right now we're going to talk about equipment rental and replacement. So equipment rental and replacement does all the maintenance, servicing, acquisition, and disposal of the city's vehicles and equipment fleet, along with managing our central stores, which procures, stores, distributes supplies and materials and small tools for city operations. And we also manage the city's fuel system for all departments. As noted on the slide, the general fund, about 2.7% of the general fund is what pays for equipment rental, along with funds from other proprietary funds like water, sewer, storm, and solid waste and airport. Similar to how IT is done, we create our budget for what's needed to service the fleet each year. That includes whatever services are needed for the vehicles that we have in the fleet, whatever upgrades we need for our own equipment and software in order to do that maintenance work, and what vehicles need replacement, as well as a breakdown of what that work falls into 3 different categories to then create what the internal service charge is to the different departments. So those 3 categories that we break that down into is fuel, which is charged based on the relative historical usage. So we look back at 3 years prior to the current budget year and look at the average usage for a department and base the charges for that department based upon that use. The vehicle replacement, we look at what vehicles are actually needing to be replaced in the inventory for each year within the upcoming budget cycle. And then we look at the maintenance based upon the number of vehicles in the inventory that are assigned to each different department. Thank you. All right, so an overview for equipment rental and replacement. So we have both an operations side as well as the capital side for the department. Operations is where we do all the maintenance work, and the central stores for materials for staff for them to do their work. And then the capital side is twofold. It is actually the procurement of equipment and vehicles, as well as some of the building maintenance and improvements that are needed for serving equipment rental itself. Some accomplishment highlights for 2019, 2020, we did implement the first all-electric vehicles in the city's fleet during 2019. And we completed the necessary certifications so that the staff can complete the forward warranty work in-house, which reduces our need to contract this work out, which has reduced the time that these vehicles are out of service. Some goals as we look forward into the next budget cycle. We do need to replace our fuel system. We have been delaying this process for several years now, and we're pretty much at the end of life of that system. So that is one of our goals within the biennium. We also continue our efforts to look at fuel economy and seek out and implement alternative fuel sources within the fleet that works for what our fleet needs are. And then as we've continued to grow our fleet and our central stores over the last several years, we are seeing a need for expansion of our facilities at M&O for fleet. And that includes basically the additional maintenance bay, as well as storage facility expansion work that needs to be done in this next biennium. And then we want to continue our efforts towards doing more certifications so we can do more repair work in-house so that we spend less time using vendors and less time with our equipment down as they're out to vendors for servicing. So major changes in the budget, the main fluctuations that happen within the equipment rental budget is really how that capital project and the equipment replacement changes from year to year. Because we look at every year specifically and go through that list and really narrow down on what really needs to be replaced based upon their mileage usage, their condition of the vehicle, and the services that we have done on those vehicles, that list is changed and modified every year. And so that changes and reduces the budget from 2020 for 21 and 22 fairly significantly because we're doing quite a bit less in equipment replacement. For the program requests for this budget, we have one program request, and that is for an overhead personal fall arrest system. What this does is this is a support system for the employees that are working on the top of large vehicles so that if they happen to slip and fall off the top of that large vehicle, they do not get hurt. So it would arrest their fall. This is something that was identified during a walkthrough with L&I a few years ago as a recommendation for an improvement. And we feel that it's time to do that so that we can do some of those repair items for those larger equipment in-house so that we don't have to send them out of house and take that equipment out of service for longer periods of time. Next slide. Okay, and then the major replacement that we are doing, I tried to summarize this a little more simple for you rather than go through all the different types of equipment and vehicles that we have in there. I broke it down into two types of equipment. We have vehicles, which is our police cars, our trucks, our vans, our small SUVs. And then we have large equipment, which is our dump trucks, our Vectors. We have a plow and sander attachments, and then trailers. And so I've broken it down by each year by the different departments for what vehicles we need to actually replace. So you can see in 2021, we have about 15 vehicles that we need to replace and 4 large equipment pieces. And in 2022, we have 12 vehicles that we need to replace and 7 equipment pieces. And you can see the breakdown by department as it's spread throughout the city for different types of needs. And with that, is there any questions?
Any questions, council? I don't see any. Councilmember Jayraj.
Thank you, Your Honor. Ingrid, my question is when you say fuel system, what is that exactly?
Yeah, so it's the pumps and the tanks and how we track the fuel usage for the vehicles down at M&O. That all needs to be replaced. Those tanks are well beyond their life. And so we need to replace that whole system.
So the tanks underground?
Correct. And
Okay.
our intent is to replace that with above ground tanks.
Oh, okay. And is it going to be computerized where you can actually read everything inside?
That would be part of what we'd be looking for is how that inventory process works for both the fuel coming in and how it's going out to the different vehicles for the tracking. Again, we track by every vehicle the fuel usage that they have every year so that we can then account for that in future budget years for how we allocate the costs for equipment rental.
Okay. All right. That was the only question I had. Thank you, Ingrid.
Welcome.
Councilmember Stearns.
Actually, I was just going to follow up on that. How much does that cost? And is that like a one-time cost or is that allocated over a year?
It is, no, it's a one-time cost and it is in the capital program. So let me get there really quick. We have currently budgeted $320,000 for that.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Deputy Mayor DeCoursey.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm going to have 2 questions for you. One is on our vehicle replacement, and I know we're probably doing this, but are we looking at getting more years, if you will, out of some of these vehicles, kind of extending their useful life? Or have we gotten to the point where, like the ones in 2021, where outside of police, where we pretty much have exhausted our useful life?
So the vehicles that are identified for replacement have basically gotten to that end of their useful life. And if we keep them longer, they will cost us more to keep them operating.
Okay.
For standard vehicles, we keep them for anywhere from 8 to 10 years. And in many cases, we actually keep them for 4 or 5 years longer than that, depending upon the condition and usage. The only vehicles that we don't keep quite that long is the police patrol vehicles because of their use. They last about 4 years.
Great, thank you. And then on page 417 on our working capital budget, we have a line item at the top for investment income. We have an actual for 2019 and then a preliminary budget for 21 and 22. Is that an allocation of our city investments? I'm not quite sure what that is.
And I'm going to let Jamie answer that one.
Okay.
So we pool all of our cash citywide for investment purposes. However, we track by fund how much cash is attributed to each fund. So as we earn interest on our overall investments, we allocate the interest earnings back out to each fund based on the amount of cash that they had contributed towards those investments.
All right.
But I did want to add to that, in our most recent budget amendment 7, that was one of the revenue reallocation tools that we had used to bring in additional revenue into the general fund. Since we do pool our investments citywide and invest them as a pool rather than individually, we legally can bring in the investment earnings from, let's say, like the equipment rental and replacement fund and pull that investment, those interest earnings into the general fund. So for 2020, we are pulling those interest earnings into the general fund. Now there are some restricted cash sources that we have throughout the city that we can't pull the interest on that, but as long as it's unrestricted cash, we did pull those interest earnings into the general fund.
Great, thank you.
Councilmember Trout Manuel.
I had a similar question to the vehicles for the police department. Are we including the 6 new SWAT vehicles on there?
This list does not include the 6 new SWAT vehicles. Those would be an additional purchase in 2021.
Okay. And that will be 464,000?
I believe that is what is in the program improvement, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Jayraj.
Thank you, Your Honor. Ingrid, one more question. The police vehicles are included in this as well?
So the existing police fleet is, and we do a replacement of anywhere from 6 to 8 vehicles per year within police, typically. This does not include the 6 new SWAT vehicles that are part of police's program improvement that you heard about last night.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Councilmember Trout Manuel, did you have another question or is your hand still up from prior?
I'm sorry, Mayor, I didn't put it down.
That's
I'll
okay.
take it down.
I wanted to make sure not to miss you. Deputy Mayor Dorsey.
Thank you again, Mayor. Ingrid, I did have one more question on the non-capital projects for, you mentioned the M&O vehicle storage bay improvements and the equipment rental vehicle maintenance bay. I know you thought through this very carefully, naturally. With our limitations of space, what are you doing and how do you accomplish this?
Yes, so as part of the facility master plan process that we're going through right now, one of the things that we're asking the consultant to look at for these specific projects in 21 and 22 is to look at how can we put those projects into place on the site so that they're not throwaway, so that they can be built into what the ultimate plan is for that site. And so for the vehicle maintenance bay, it's basically adding on to the existing maintenance bays that are there. And then for the storage facilities, it's adding on to one of the existing storage facilities that's out there.
Great,
and then the
you.
fuel tank replacement would be looking for the best location within the M&O facilities for where that should be located.
Right. I see we still have the lunchroom expansion on the capital plan as well. Or on the
We do.
project plan, yeah.
We do. And again, we'll be looking at how does that fit with ultimate improvements for M&O in the future, so that, again, we don't do something that is throwaway.
Great, thank you.
Councilmember Stearns.
Thank you, Your Honor. I had a question, but the SWAT vehicles, do we have any right now? I'm sorry, I'm a little bit behind on this conversation.
It's the replacement for the van that Dan was mentioning, that Chief was mentioning last night.
Mhm. Correct. So we have one big van that is up for replacement. And so that's where the funds to replace, instead of replacing that van, police will use the funds that would have replaced that van to purchase 6 vehicles, along with the additional, I want to say it was about 115,000 from the drug.
Seizures.
Yeah, drug seizures.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Any other questions, council? And to follow up, also with Councilmember Stern's question, on book 1, page 250 and 251 is a more detailed description of the request for those 6 police SWAT vehicles as well, and how they'd be funded. If there aren't any other questions for Ingrid.
Jamie, what page did you say that was on book 1?
250 and 251.
Thank you.
And if there are no other questions for Ingrid, we can go ahead and move along to Director Hinman, and she will be presenting the facilities and the multimedia internal service funds.
Perfect, thank you, Jamie. Hello, Mayor, Deputy Mayor, City Council. Just 2 more of my divisions to go over with you. And they're, again, those are inter-service or inter-fund services, which means we support the entire city with the funds allocated from the different departments. And in facilities specifically, our goal is always to, provide all of our city departments and the public with safe and clean facilities, number 1. Number 2 would be to preserve city-owned facilities. And I highlight that because our number 1 goal is to avoid emergencies. We do not want our systems going down. We do not want our buildings unoccupiable for whatever reason. And we want to keep our costs down as much as we can by maintaining our systems as best that we can. We do provide building support to each and every department. In 2019, the facilities crew responded to just over 1,300 requests in their buildings, and that ranges from changing a light bulb to maybe a major repair of a floor or swapping out office equipment, and all of those things that go on each and every day with our employee base. We support 13 buildings, approximately 263,000 square feet with about 11 staff members. So like some of our other divisions, they're small, but they're mighty. They get a lot of work done, whether it's maintaining buildings, overseeing the safety and security of the buildings, custodial, helping departments plan the spaces when we move employees around, or in this case, as we have had a major movement of employees and major needs in our facilities to keep facilities safe. Just like everybody else, we had to pivot to COVID and personal protection and things like that. Another big thing that our facilities group is very proud of is how we manage energy. And we see a lot of cost savings each year by the programs that we're involved in, and by doing our best to have a low carbon footprint and be an example for the rest of the city on not being wasteful around energy and all of those other things. You can see there that our budget changes are minimal, really. The facilities fund is, just over 4% of the general fund for what they do. And the two new programs both have to do with HVAC equipment and replacement. If you want to take a look at those program requests, you can find them on page 242 and 243 in book 1. And this has a big goal for us this year. HVAC is often very expensive, but we also have a lot of aging buildings, and we have a lot of aging systems in place where the HVAC is concerned. And the biggest cost is the HVAC here at City Hall, and some of our other facilities as well that either need replacement or major repairs in order to keep them going. The concern around these two projects specifically is because some of the systems are a little bit older. It's getting harder to find parts. So, in some cases, we can look at a project and look at the project cost and maybe delay it a little or do some deferred maintenance, which is a phrase we don't really like to use in the facilities division, because usually if you defer it, by the time you get around to it, it's more expensive than if you would have taken care of the repairs or replacement early on. So Lisa and her staff do a great job of looking forward and looking at how we can keep our systems well maintained so we don't have major emergency repairs. And so that is facilities in a nutshell. If anybody has any questions on that before I move into multimedia.
Questions, council? Deputy Mayor DeCoursey.
Thank you, Mayor. Dana, two things. One is on page 19. This is under our budget detail. Line item for annual maintenance. I'm sorry, a line item for hardwood floor care at the activity center at $21,000 a year. What do we do to care for the hardwood?
I don't know if Director Faber is on the call. He probably has a better grasp of that. Okay. I can go back to my years of being a teacher and a coach, and I know that each year, basically, you need to finish and refinish a floor in order to keep the hardwood from becoming damaged. And I'm going to guess that is kind of annual maintenance for that space.
Yeah, that's correct. We have the 3-bay conference room as well as the double-bay gymnasium and the hardwood at the senior center. And so they annually refinish it, and about every 8 years, they actually sand it down to the lines and then recoat it again.
Great, thank you. And then Dana, it's not in here, but I believe we had in the past, you had an item for our City Hall roof replacement. And is that still in the works, or has that been deferred?
That has been deferred for the moment. There have been other improvements that Lisa and her group have done that make that able to probably go for another couple of years. And the constant question we ask, especially about City Hall, is, how long are we going to pour money into this building?
Yes.
Before we, so literally every City Hall project that Lisa does, that question was asked. It's like, tell me, do we want to do this? And the HVAC is one that causes her to cringe slightly, but if I can draw you back to how those things are funded, that the facilities fund has a fund balance that it maintains, or a contingency fund, if you will. So the money is already there, and we are using contingency fund plus REACH funding in order to do these two HVAC big projects.
Right. And the HVAC at City Hall, that's a full replacement?
It's not a full replacement. It is a what she is calling a major repair, and some systems will be replaced.
Okay, great. All right, thank you.
Councilmember Jayraj has a question.
Thank you, Your Honor. Following up on the Deputy Mayor's question, as far as the center is concerned, the recreation center, you said the gym, but how about the basketball court? Does that need that as well?
That is the gym. Yeah, I think we're
Oh,
talking
that is
the same thing. Yeah, yeah.
okay. Because I was thinking the other place as well. Okay. Thank you.
Councilmember Trout Manuel.
Where'd you go?
Councilmember Trout Manuel, did you have a question? And if you do, I believe you might be on mute.
Did you ask me now, Mayor
Yes.
Nancy? I'm sorry, I was kicked off for a few minutes, and so I just came back on.
Okay, did you have a question?
I did. It was pertaining to Deputy Mayor DeCourcy's question about the roofing. It's on page 20, item number 17, and it's got on there City Hall roofing replacement. So Dana, you said that has been deferred?
Yes.
Okay, but will we bring this back to, will it come back to us for that amount of money?
Yeah, at this point, Lisa feels like it probably could last until the next budget cycle for where it is right now. So it was the HVAC that kind of took priority over that.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other questions on this portion? All right, Dana, continue on, please.
Thank you. And lastly, our multimedia group, again, an interfund. We serve all of the departments, whether it comes to our video services, PR, communications, emergency and crisis communications, all of our websites, the majority of the graphic design and printing and mailing services. And we are one of those departments, as I was listening to the conversations yesterday around the IT budget and how that is allocated out. This is one of the divisions that is a heavy user of IT services. We require some very specialized software and as well as Jason, our videographer, requires kind of some supercomputers to do the video work that he does and to manage the large files and projects that he does, as well as our print shop and our mailing services, the mailing machines. So we are pretty much standalone when it comes to printing and mailing. We are our own mail house, if you will. And so printing and postage are probably our largest cost centers of what we spend money on. And as Director Thomas had explained previously, that each division that is interfund, like facilities, like multimedia, like IT, there is a formula by which we allocate those costs out and charge them back to the departments. And in facilities, it's basically based on square footage. And with multimedia, it's a little bit of some forecasting and then some historical use, so that the heaviest users of our services are charged by what they use, and those that don't use a lot of services are not charged as much, depending on what it is that they need from us. So we fulfill, I don't know, probably about 2,000 requests a year. And it runs the gamut of graphic design or printing, a video project, help with some social media, advertising, PR, whatever those things are. And, the goal is always to try to keep our costs as low as they can be. Some of the things that help fund our services are also the franchise fees that we collect through Comcast and other things. A lot of Jason's equipment is funded through franchise fees as well as the interfund. And I suppose I could give council a few kudos here, although you may not have really desired to go digital as quickly as you have. It's been a cost savings for us in multimedia to not print as many packets as we used to due to the pandemic. And it's always a goal of ours to reduce printing and save those resources in any way that we can. And so the city council has saved us a good deal of money going into the next biennium, because we are assuming we will not be printing as much as we had in the past. So that's kind of the general overview and a look at our budget. We're not asking for anything new. We do have one part-time position that is frozen right now that's contributing to the cost savings as we go into our next budget cycle.
Questions, council? Okay. Thank you, Dana.
Thank you.
And the last two internal service funds I'm going to run through. One of them is our workers' compensation fund. The costs that get attributed or are charged out to the general fund account for 1.3% of the general fund budget. And what the workers' compensation fund is our self-insured workers' comp claim fund, essentially. So rather than using L&I and collecting rates from both of the employee and the employer per employee, and then remitting that money to L&I either on a monthly or a quarterly basis, we collect money from ourselves. We set our own rates. We put the money into our self-insurance fund for workers' compensation. And then when we have claims that L&I tells us that we need to pay, we pay for them directly. So because this usually creates really a cost savings for both the city and employees, because we typically have a lower workers' compensation experience rating than the pooled average that L&I would be charging us for, because L&I would be setting the rates that we would need to pay. So how this fund is funded is directly through the payroll system. We establish rates for employees and the employer. That said, employees only contribute about 4% of the total that goes into this fund. So we collect about $1.1 million a year into the workers' compensation fund, and only about $45,000 actually comes from employees. The city pays for the rest of the contributions into the fund. So in addition to workers' comp claims, the types of payments that this fund pays for includes, so the time loss payments directly to the employees, as well as medical claims associated with those worker comp claims, and then our stop loss insurance. So the stop loss insurance is an important piece to what this fund does. It helps protect us from really large workers' comp claims, so any very serious on the job injuries, then at the point that a claim exceeds the stop loss, then the stop loss insurance would take over the costs associated with that claim. As far as budget changes, there's a slight increase in, so now that's how the fund is funded. So significant budget changes is the expenditure side. The $43,000 increase in 2021 and the $7,000 increase in 2022 are our expected increases in expenditures into the workers' comp fund. And really this is attributed It's a pretty small increase. Mostly it's attributed to interfund service charges, like all other funds. And then what we expect our time loss payments to be in the future. And really it's an estimate. We have no idea what those claims are really going to be. And so we use historical averages to come up with a budgeted amount on the expenditure side. So that's workers' compensation. Are there any questions for me on that fund?
Councilmember Stearns?
Thank you, Your Honor. Are there any like increased costs or projected because of COVID-19?
No. Are you talking on the claims side or medical payment? No, I don't think so. It's not something that we've considered. I see what you're saying. If people are getting sick at work and they have a claim, we haven't seen any of those yet. And so we haven't taken into account any increases in claims as a result of COVID. That said, we budget pretty conservatively on the as far as the claims go, and then we also the fund is pretty well funded. So even if we were to exceed what our projected claims are, we should be good.
Deputy Mayor DeCoursey.
Thank you, Mayor. Jamie, being self-funded, do we still track our experience modification? And if so, what is our experience modification rating? And is there any impact or involvement with L&I on that?
That is a good question. I don't know if Director Martinson is on the call and if she has any information on our experience rating and if that's tracked by L&I. So what I'll do
on the call tonight.
Yeah. So and I apologize for that. I want to say we don't, but there's a lot of things that HR does behind the scenes. They do a lot of magic, so they may very well be tracking experience ratings. So I will follow up with you on that.
That'd be great. Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions for this? Oh, that's right. Councilmember Brown. Sorry, I had scrolled up.
Thank you, Your Honor. I appreciate it. So I'm curious about the part of the premium that is paid by the employee. What percentage did you say that was?
The total overall contribution is 4%. So we've got a little over $1.1 million that is funded into the workers' comp fund, and 4% or about $45,000 comes from the employees.
And is that fund managed by the city? Or do we pay into a retro fund?
It's managed by the city. So HR manages the funds and the claims, both the medical claims and the stop loss claims that come through.
You know, I work around workers' comp issues, and I would like to just tell the rest of the council that Washington State is the only state which the worker pays into workers' comp. And that's a little amazing to me, but what it results in is some of the highest benefit payouts to injured workers on lost time with a relatively lower cost to the employers because the employees are paying in. And, you know, I think quite frankly, it helps us all be a little more aware of how we have to conduct ourselves at work to try to stay safe. So anyway, thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Trout Manuel.
Yes, are we considered the third party administrator, and does it always stay at that cost at all the time?
We are not the third-party administrator, so that would be the party that we pay to help review claims and approve claims, and then we make the payments. So we aren't the ones making the decision whether or not a claim gets paid. We're not reviewing the actual medical bills. That's one of the jobs of our third-party administrator. And there were no increases just because there hasn't been any increases with our third-party administrator.
Okay, but eventually, is there an increase? Is there a fluctuation?
I mean,
depending on how many cases they have?
It's more of a professional services contract. So, and usually when we go out for third-party administrators, there's usually an RFP that's done with finding a new third-party administrator. So, depending on when or if we either want to renegotiate a contract or look for a new third-party administrator, then our rates could very well change at that time.
Okay, thank you very much.
Councilmember J. Raj.
Thank you, Your Honor. Jamie, it'll probably be a stupid question, but what happens to the funds that's not used?
It goes into, well, it's similar to any of our other funds. It would go into fund balance. And right now we have, I'd have to look, I think we've got a little over $1 million in fund balance at the end of 2022. Let me look. Oh, I way understated it. We are projected to end 2022 with a fund balance of $2.9 million. So that money would be in there to help either stabilize rates in the future. For instance, we didn't increase rates at all for 22 or 20 or for 21 or 22. We've kept rates the same just because it is it's well funded at this point. So if that we would want to keep a certain fund balance level just for contingency purposes. However, it is something that we could look in the future if we wanted to maybe even either buy down rates or stabilize rates in the future. That would be probably the most common way of using a large accumulated fund balance.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay.
All right. So the last internal service fund is our insurance fund. And there's a couple of different types of activities that take place in the insurance fund. It acts kind of as a pass-through for both our property insurance and our liability insurance associated with all city vehicles. The money doesn't really actually flow through the insurance fund. Those insurance costs for vehicles and property insurance actually are charged back to each of the departments based on the number of assets they have in their fund. For example, equipment replacement, the equipment rental and replacement fund will actually pay for the entire portion of the vehicle insurance premium that we pay for. So there isn't really, it's more of a pass-through for those types of insurance costs that go through this insurance fund. The most significant activity then, aside from that, is actually our unemployment claims. Similar to our workers' comp, we are self-funded for unemployment. So we are currently fully funded. In the past, what we've done, and we've kind of done a little bit of an infusion of cash. The last one that we had done was back in 2017, where we transferred a little over $600,000 to make sure that the insurance fund was fully funded. We haven't had to make any additional increases to the fund since then. So as we receive unemployment claims from Washington State unemployment, we fund those entirely ourselves. So there's no new changes to the revenue side of this budget because it's well funded, and our budget for 21-22 on the expenditure side remains the same as it's been. And again, that's based on historical usage and historical unemployment claims that we've had. And there is quite a bit of a fluctuation if you look back in our history. Back in 2014 really was the last year we had a pretty high claim year at 159,000. Last year was our lowest claim year in the last 10 years or so, and that was only 36,000. Because I know that there's probably another COVID impact question coming up. We are trending high this year in comparison to prior year, in comparison to 2018 as far as unemployment claims go, which we knew was going to happen because we had to lay off a pretty large portion of our seasonal and temporary employees. And to date, we have paid $49,000 out of our out of unemployment insurance fund. That only accounts for the first half of the year though. So I would expect that to likely double. So maybe end the year with about $100,000 in claims. Excuse me. The good news about that is that any unemployment claims that we are paying as a result of layoffs tied to COVID, those claims are reimbursable through the CARES Act grant. So we will be able to replenish those payouts with CARES grant money.
Deputy Mayor DeCoursey.
Thank you, Mayor. Jamie, thank you for answering the COVID question. In relation to the unemployment claims, if someone is unemployed long-term, what is our exposure to that? How long do we have to pay benefits? I know there's a limitation, but let's say somebody's unemployed for 2 years. What is our exposure and our participation in continuing to pay claims?
26 weeks, isn't it?
Well, that is another really good question for our human resources and the laws that surround unemployment. There is a maximum amount of time that you can claim unemployment. And really, even when it comes to even making the determination whether an employee is eligible to receive unemployment, we are at the mercy of Washington State Unemployment to make those calls. So essentially, they send us a bill and we pay it. We pay them back. But
thank you. Yeah, I've seen in the past where, let's say somebody is unemployed, they get a job, they're unemployed again, and this is kind of a cycle. They go back to all the previous employers, and my understanding is the previous employers participate in that unemployment benefit. So I guess if Candace could clarify that for us, that would be really good. So thank you.
I will make sure we get a good answer on that.
Councilmember J. Raj.
Oh, you're on mute.
Never fails for me. Jamie, question is you said 49,000 for the first part of the year, and then you said 100,000. That kind of threw me off a little bit.
The reason I say that is we just received our bill for the second quarter of 2020. And so after paying that second bill, we've paid a total of $49,000 in unemployment. Assuming that we kind of stay on this trend of where we're at today, I would expect the total bills that we get for those unemployment claims would be at least another $49,000 for the second half of the year.
Oh, okay. Because we're still not, the city is still not open yet as far as the employees are concerned.
That's correct. Well, we had, and then we also had, and that's why I think that it might, that second quarter might be a little bit higher than even third and fourth quarter, although some of the activity kind of bleeds through several quarters. We had several employees on the shared work program. So we didn't, they weren't laid off entirely, but they were receiving unemployment benefits for the hours that they weren't getting here at work. Well, that program has since ended. So that I think, contributed to some of those increased costs on our second quarter bill. But I don't expect that program to be lasting into the fourth quarter of this year. So it's high for some reason, so I think that we're going to continue having some of those same unemployment costs carrying forward, but then we might have savings in other areas as well if we're able to start bringing staff back on.
Okay. So since we're self-funded, right?
Yes.
So how does it, are we pretty healthy as far as cash is concerned?
So normally what you would expect, you would expect us to do something similar to what we do for workers' comp, where we charge on an either per hour basis for each employee that has worked. But currently we don't even need to do that because we, the fund has enough, it's well enough funded. So if we go to page 111 in book 2, you can see, well, not 111, go to 112, and you can see our fund balance, estimated fund balance at the end of 2022 is $1.4 million. So that's taking into account adding no new revenues to the fund over the biennium, and then an average claim, a drawdown of $175,000 each year. So even with that, our fund remains pretty healthy. So that's kind of, it's a very similar concept behind the last question about what do you do with your fund balance? Well, we can help hold rates, save ourselves money and not contribute to rates until we spend that fund balance down a little bit more. And then we can slowly start adding rates back into what we charge through the payroll system, our payroll system.
Okay. All right. So at the end of the day, we have to pay unemployment for whatever they've helped us with. Is that how it works?
Yeah, so normally if you're not self-funded, we would be paying based on our experience rating. We would be charged a number of employees that we have and the number of hours. We would be paying either on a monthly or quarterly basis to unemployment. And then as claims came in, then they would just pay the claims. And then we've already paid what we were on the hook for. But because we're self-funded, we don't get the bill until somebody actually files for unemployment. And then we have to pay those unemployment claims as they come through.
So what is the benefit then?
Well, again, it's very similar. Our experience rating is actually lower than the average if we were put into a pool on average. So what we would be charged if we were letting the unemployment, Washington State Unemployment or ESD manage it, we would be paying a higher rate per employee, and our costs would be higher than what our actual costs are, just because that's really common with most government agencies. We just have we tend to have lower unemployment claims. We have more unemployment.
So are we doing, I may be jumping the gun on this, but are we doing the same thing for our medical as well?
No, we are not self-funded for medical, no.
Okay.
Different story.
Yeah.
I know, I was just kind of like thinking, I know some companies do that, but
yes,
I was kind of wondering about
it. I used to work for a company that was self-insured. It's very expensive.
And some cities do too. I think that Auburn, we just don't have enough employees to make the average cost really smooth out for a self-insured. Usually it's really large companies, like the mayor's experience, or really large cities. They are able to realize cost savings through self-insurance because they've got such a large employee group, and the actual medical costs kind of average out more favorable than when you're in a pool with other types of industries in other cities. We're just, I think, too small of a city for that to pencil out for us and have savings.
Okay. Thank you, Jamie. Appreciate your answers.
As best as I could. I do have follow-up questions still from the real workers' comp and unemployment experts. Any other questions about internal service funds?
All right.
Okay.
Moving on.
So now we get to talk about the really big money, and that's our general governmental capital. So general governmental capital is really, we have all sorts of capital projects, and Ingrid's going to be talking about her utility capital projects later. But this part of the discussion really focuses on the capital projects that support general fund type activities. So that's capital for our city facilities, our city property, our city parks, and anything else that would support the operations of the general fund. So for us, our capital projects are adopted through a 6-year capital improvement plan. We update that every year. And the importance of updating that capital plan is that things change rapidly. We get new funding, whether it's through grants or maybe mostly through new grants, or if we have changes in project budgets. So what an original project budget estimate is might vary from what actual project costs are. So we need to do adjustments there. And then there's just the reprioritization of projects in general. So every year we update that 6-year capital improvement plan to align with where we're going at that time. So the difference between the 6-year capital improvement plan and our biennial budget is the biennial budget only encumbers expenditures and project costs for the current 2-year fiscal period that we're in. So the 6-year plan has got a much longer range vision so we can think big picture, and we start planning down the road. But we need to make sure, if we actually want to move forward with the projects, to get council approval and adoption for the expenditures in the biennial budget. So in our budget, we make sure that we account for all of the capital expenditures that we need to take place in 21 and 22. Just in general, any money that we don't spend on a project that has been budgeted in a given year will automatically get carried forward into the next budget cycle until the project is either complete or the money has been reprioritized or reallocated to other projects. So the types of governmental capital projects and how they're funded. Typically speaking, these are the 4 largest sources. There's always some miscellaneous revenue in there, but these are by and large the most significant sources of funding for our general governmental capital, and that's grants. City staff work really hard to secure grants. It's not easy money, that's for sure, but we rely very significantly on those grants to help fund our general governmental capital. We have a real estate excise tax, which you probably have also heard me refer to as a REIT, and that is our portion of tax that we collect, that the city gets to collect on the sale of real estate transactions that take place within our city. There's some very specific restrictions on how real estate excise tax can be used. Generally speaking, it can only be used for general government capital, also utility infrastructure improvements also, but it can't be used for repairs and maintenance. It has to be for either large restoration projects or new improvements or full-scale renovations, but not small-scale repairs, maintenance, or operations. Impact fees, these are fees that we collect for both traffic and parks, and they're collected in the mitigation fees fund, and these are charges that we charge to developers when they're doing work within the city. The money on the impact fees, when we collect them, are also limited in how they can be spent. They can only be used for system enhancements. Again, they can't be used for preservation, repairs, or maintenance, because the idea behind these impact fees are for the increased capacity needed when a developer brings a project into the city. The idea is that we need to develop larger and more infrastructure to accommodate that development. So that's why that money can only be used for enhancements to the existing system. And then there's utility tax. We collect 1% of the utility, an additional 1% on utilities, and that 1% goes into the arterial street preservation fund. And it's very specific that utility tax must go to arterial street preservation. And then how I'm going to be presenting the general government capital today is from a very high level, but there are many different capital funds, special revenue funds and capital funds that we have. And it's very difficult to look at each fund on an individual basis because there's a lot of transferring of revenue. There's different types of revenue in different funds, and sometimes we transfer money from fund to fund, and it's not a very easy way to look at the big picture of all of our general governmental capital. So I'm going to kind of combine it all into one presentation today. And to kind of roadmap it a little bit, you can see all of these funds here. These are all of the funds that either have, that collect revenue that are specifically to be used for general governmental capital, or they're funds where we're actually paying for the projects. We're actually accounting for the projects. So if you want to go into detail and actually see, I said that I wasn't going to go through each fund and the changes in each one of those funds, but if you would like to go and look at what each of those funds look like, I also roadmapped it a little bit for you so you can see, you can look at and review each fund individually. But on a high level, our mitigation fee fund collects those transportation and park impact fees, and it's for the expansion of transportation and park systems. Our capital improvement fund, most of the revenue that is collected into that fund is our real estate excise tax. We also have grants and transfers in from other capital improvement funds. So this is where I was talking about there's transfers from fund to fund, and that makes it a little bit more confusing. In the capital improvement fund, we do budget for projects out of there. They run the gamut between facilities projects, parks projects, streets projects, as well as we pay a portion of our debt service out of that fund as well. So we pay about $890,000 a year for the debt service on the City Hall Annex building, as well as the local revitalization fund bonds that we issued in 2010. Our local revitalization fund, as I just mentioned, was funded actually with a 2010 bond issue, and that allowed us to do some very specific infrastructure improvement projects in a defined downtown area. We have a little bit of money left over in that fund that we plan to be spending in 2021. Arterial streets are funded primarily through federal and state grants, motor vehicle fuel tax, and transfers in from the mitigation fee fund. This is for arterial street construction. We have some project management costs, so staff time to manage those projects. Some of their time is charged from arterial streets. And then Ingrid also wanted me to mention, because although relatively small, it's a very important piece, our Route 497 agreements with both King County Metro and Pierce Transit are paid for out of that fund. We also have our local street preservation fund, and that is funded with transfers in of real estate excise tax, and that is for the construction and repair of our local streets. We have an arterial street preservation fund, mostly is made up of that 1% for utility tax I had mentioned, and then federal and state grants, and that is for arterial streets repair and preservation. And then our very last one, but not least, is municipal parks, and that is funded with King County Prop 2 money. It's a property tax levy that King County has levied, and we get a small piece of that, and then grants, and then transfers in from those parks mitigation fees mentioned above. And this fund will only support parks capital projects. So it's very high level. I know that was a lot of words. Any questions about that?
Council, any questions? Member Trout Manuel.
Yes, on the last one that you were talking about, King County Prop, what percentage do we receive from them?
Ooh, that exact percentage, I am not sure. I can tell you the dollar figure though. So we receive about $215,000 a year in that Prop 2 money. And I'm not even sure it's necessarily a percentage. I think it's an allocation.
It is.
Oh, okay.
It is an allocation, and Daryl, I know, is online. He may want to talk about it a little bit more, but
it's based on the assessed value of your city. So for us, it's the King County portion of the city of Auburn, and it goes up next year with the new Prop 2 levy. So it's used to be about 150,000. It's going to be about 200,000 a year now.
And it's only used for maintenance on parks, or what is it used for?
It can't be used for maintenance. It has to be used for development or major replacement.
Yeah, capital projects is
Okay,
listed on the chart.
okay, thank you.
Yeah,
Okay.
and they are, and that levy money does very specifically, there are strings attached to that money, and we do get reviewed and audited on how we're spending that money. So.
And Daryl and I fought hard with King County as they were putting that levy back on the ballot, as well as did all SCA cities, to ensure that cities had a larger portion of the dollars, since there is a significant portion of the dollars that are generated in Auburn. We do not get back what we put in, but the argument is that everyone gets to enjoy King County parks, and so that's why we don't get everything back that we put in. Councilmember Stearns.
Thank you, Your Honor. Now, on the local revitalization, I was just wondering how much was the bond issue? And then also, what was the heritage building issue?
So the first question, that bond issue was $6 million. I just had it out. It was how we calculate, what's that? How we calculated that money. So how that bond issue amount is determined is we're able to take a portion of the state's sales tax. We're able to levy a portion of the sales tax the state collects, and they give us back $250,000 a year for 30 years to pay off we can use that money to pay off our bond issuance costs. So when we issued that bond, the idea being, as long as we needed to make sure that our debt service costs didn't exceed $500,000, because there's a matching piece. So it's essentially whatever $500,000 a year would buy us in debt service. And
weren't we closer to a $9 or $10 million?
I might be getting two different.
If I can add, we got a $3 million ECDEV grant.
Okay,
and then a $6 million bond.
Perfect. So we're both right. 6 million, 9 million. I was remembering the 9 million of the entire amount that we received.
Yep, because it was $6.3 million is what the bond issuance was. I was trying to remember where I put my debt service sheet. I'm sorry.
Thank you, Ingrid.
Oh, the Heritage Building?
So what was your question about the Heritage Building?
I think it said there was like, it just said something about.
So Jamie, I can answer that.
Until the Heritage Building is addressed.
Yeah. So the last project that was identified, utilizing that bond funding, was some improvements to the parking lot next to Safeway that the city owns, so behind the Main Street buildings. The Heritage Building is the building that burned down on Main Street, and so we put a pause on what we were doing behind there until we knew what was happening with the Heritage Building and what improvements they might be doing in that parking lot as well.
Oh, okay, great. Thank you. That makes total.
Thank you, Ingrid.
Welcome.
Okay. So this next chart just shows, if we take all of those funds together, and all of the projects that we're going to be doing in the biennium, how are those projects being funded? What are the sources for those projects? And that is what this chart is. So you can see most of the revenue that we're using to support our current projects is impact fees. Again, that's limited to system enhancements. We've got REIT, which is such an important piece. However, we're kind of limited. We don't have any control over that revenue source. That is, again, based on real estate transactions that take place in Auburn. We currently budget to receive about $2 million in REIT revenue on an annual basis. And then I just wanted to call out the fund balance piece. And the reason why there's fund balance here is because on every year, we're not spending down every single dollar that we receive and we collect. So there are some years where we're saving and we're accumulating in some of those funds, and then there's other years that we're spending down some of the fund balance. So the fund balance, depending on the fund or depending on the projects that we're using, is comprised of a couple of different things. So we have a little bit of fund balance left over from that local revitalization financing. So about $275,000 in that fund balance will be used towards the parking lot. And then another $1.4 million, and this is all related to the arterial street fund. So it's a mixture of different revenue that's accumulated in the fund balance, but it's mostly motor vehicle fuel tax, interest earnings, and other miscellaneous developer fees that we've collected into that fund over the years. So that's what the generic fund balance means. So that was the revenue side of all of our capital. This is the expenditure side of all the capital that we have planned in the next couple of years. And I have them here listed by fund. Mitigation fee fund, you see there's no activity. That's because really the sole purpose of the mitigation fee fund is to collect revenue, and then it transfers out money as needed to eligible projects throughout the other funds. And then I'd mentioned the last project in the local revitalization fund, the $245,000 is the last amount of that money left over. And we have that budgeted in our 6-year CIP to be spent in 2021. And then because there are 78 projects in total in our 21-22 capital improvement plan, and that's a lot of things going on, I kept it limited to just a few projects that are really the most significant. And I'm not sure, can you guys see the number in that column? I'm looking at my screen and I can't see that column. I want to make sure you guys can see it.
So we see the 6-year impact column, Jamie.
Oh, perfect. Okay, good. So that 6-year impact, the reason why some of those numbers look extra big, particularly with the Auburn Way South improvements, remembering that is when we put the 6-year CIP plan together, it's for a 6-year period of time. So that in that case, that $10.6 million reflects the cost of the project over a 6-year time frame, not necessarily the biennium. So I didn't limit it to just the 2-year impact because I don't think that's an accurate reflection of what the actual project costs. So I put the 6-year impact for the most significant projects in our 21-22 budget. And I know that Ingrid and Daryl are both on, and if you guys had any specific questions about any of these projects, you can either reference the page number that I have here or ask them.
I don't see any hands raised.
Okay. Well, then with that, I'm going to move away from general governmental capital. So just a quick recap, we've gone through all of our general fund departments, our internal service funds, and our general governmental capital. And now we're going to go into our enterprise funds. And those are all of our business type activity funds that are fully supported by user fees of those systems specifically. So we're shifting focus on the type of activities in our budget. So we're going from general funded activities to business type activities. And we have Director Faber is going to kick us off with the cemetery fund.
Yeah, thank you. Daryl Faber, Parks Director, Mayor, Council, thanks for having us back tonight. Starting it off with the cemetery fund, it's an enterprise fund, so it's operated as a business. And I'm super successful, really thrilled about it. Just a little bit of facts before we start. There are 103 cemetery districts in Washington, and 77 cities and towns have their own cemeteries. So 180 cemeteries. We are the largest in the state, and we provide between 250 and 300 internments and inurnments annually. Our revenues are always in excess of about $1.3 million, and the expenses slightly less, as it's an enterprise. So I'm really excited about the staff of 6 that are up there. Craig Hudson's been leading it for quite a few years, and it really provides a beautiful service to our community up at Mountain View Cemetery. They also provide the services that happen 1 or 2 annually down at the Pioneer Cemetery as well. So that's just the internments there. So a couple of things that we've done up there this past year is we did a complete asphalt overlay in cooperation with the city's local streets projects. We added on to their bid and actually got the roads, the streets throughout the cemetery repaved this year for the first time in probably over 50 years. And completed a re-roof of the maintenance building up there as well, and began the plans for a new mausoleum building that's going to be in the center of the cemetery, as we've sold out the existing mausoleum. So that's part of the capital plans for 21-22. I think that's about it on that one. Much of our revenue obviously is from lot sales. We were concerned that this year would be down because of COVID, but our numbers are extremely good. I talked to Craig today, and we're expecting about 1.4 million in revenues, and that's up about 100,000 from last year. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Questions, council?
Okay, then I'm going to hand it back to, it's a little bit of a hot potato tonight. I'm going to hand it back to Director Galvin to talk about water, sewer, storm, and metro.
All right. Thank you, Jamie. So for the record, Ingrid Gao, Public Works Director. As Daryl indicated on the cemetery, so these are enterprise funds, which means that they are fully self-sufficient funds. They're funded through user fees and charges, so they don't receive any funding through the general fund. So we have to make sure that we are using that money wisely so that we can make sure that our water, sewer, and storm systems are functioning within the rates that we're charging our customers. So to give you an idea of what the water utility does, so it provides the potable water to all of our customers, and the water is supplied by wells and springs. We do have some backup connections through interties with other agencies, the largest one of those being the city of Tacoma. We also supply Algona with their water supply through a wholesale agreement. And we also have a wholesale agreement with Meridian Water District, which was formerly Water District 111. However, they don't actually take any water from us right now. The system includes pipes, valves, fittings, pumps, wells, reservoirs, collection facilities, and treatment facilities. So it's a fairly large system for us to maintain. The sanitary sewer utility collects and conveys sewage from our customers to the King County wastewater system. The city does not provide its own treatment. The system includes pipes, manholes, force mains, and pump stations. The storm drainage utility collects stormwater from public facilities such as roads and sidewalks and conveys and treats and/or releases to natural drainage ways such as creeks and rivers. The system includes pipes, manholes, catch basins, ponds, swales, vaults, treatment facilities, and ditches throughout the city. King County Metro is really just a pass-through because they take our sewage and collect it and convey it to the treatment facility and provide treatment for our customers. And so this account was so that we could track that cost for Metro separate from what it costs for us to maintain our own sewer system. So some highlights on accomplishments and some goals for the upcoming biennium. In water, we did reach our conservation goal of 172 gallons per day per equivalent residential unit for 2 of the past 5 years. We also initiated the lead service line replacement program and was able to obtain state funding for that program. And then we also issued, in conjunction with finance, 14 million in bonds for capital projects for the water program. So that allows us to do a significant amount of improvements over the next 3 years to our water system. In sewer, we completed our large diameter pipe assessment. So this is an assessment of all of our large facilities to determine if we have any issues or concerns with those facilities, meaning that we need to spend some time doing some maintenance on them. And then we also installed the flow meters for our I&I analysis work. So that's inflow and infiltration into the sewer system. So that is a way to determine how much excess rainwater is getting or groundwater is getting into the system and how can we reduce that so that we do not have as much flow in our sewer system. For our storm, we continue to meet our permit requirements for our phase 2 MPDES permit, and that is the main purpose of that fund is to get those permit requirements met. And then we've also implemented our ditch maintenance program and began that in this last biennium. For all of the utilities, we completed a significant number of capital projects. So I'm not going to go through those in detail because we'd be here for a while. For our highlights going into 2021, 2022, we need to complete those bond-funded projects for water. So that is a significant priority for our water fund. And then we also will be making a request to extend the comp plan requirement to a 10-year update for water instead of the 7-year update. That was a recent change in state law, but we have to make a request to allow that. And that's pretty significant because you can imagine that doing a major update to our comprehensive plan for water is a significant undertaking. So being able to move that out and do that every 10 years instead of every 7 years is a benefit to the system. And then we are also working on completing an evaluation on our water rights and developing a plan for transferring some of our water rights that we have obtained in the past that we still need to move over to Auburn. This is related to the city of Algona. And when we took over providing them with water, they provided us with some of their water rights, and we just need to transfer those over to a system where we can actually utilize those water rights. For sewer, we need to increase our education and outreach related to fats, oils, and grease so that we can reduce issues with our troubled lines and also with side sewer customer issues related to that. And then for both sewer and storm, as Jeff mentioned last night, we have the comp plan coming up. And so we will be doing the work to start the process for those major comp plan updates for those two utilities. And then also in storm, we are completing the inventory of our system and assets so that we have a better understanding of exactly what we have out there. As you can imagine, the storm system is one that was built over many years, and it was started being built prior to us actually having a storm utility. So the records for that and the records of what we inherited from King County over the years is not as accurate as we would like it to be. So this has been an ongoing process for us to do that inventory and get the information into our asset management system. Okay, so for water, major changes in the budget for the upcoming biennium really has to do with the capital fund, and it's really just a reduction in what's being transferred from our operating fund to the capital fund. For program improvements within the water fund, we have two in there. One of them is an upgrade to our radio system for our SCADA system. SCADA stands for Supervisory Control and Data Acquisition. So this is the system that communicates with all of our utility facilities out in the field and communicates back to us what's happening in the system. So it's an important piece for us, and it's critical for our functioning of our system. And that radio system is really at the end of its useful life and needs to be upgraded. The other one that we have is the utility billing online customer portal. So this is the last phase of our automated meter infrastructure project. This is the piece that will allow customers to actually go in and see some real-time information on their water usage, and is something that finance and IT will be working towards completing. On capital projects for water, we have quite a few capital projects in there, so I'm only going to touch on a couple of the major ones. We have the Academy pump station replacement that we'll be doing in this biennium. We have our Coal Creek Springs transmission main replacement. That main currently runs under the White River. This project will be a new pipe over the White River, and we are working with Parks to hopefully complete a pedestrian bridge on top of that pipeline between Game Farm Park and Game Farm Wilderness Park. We also have our deduct meter replacement program, and that's important to get those deduct meters out of our system so that we can more accurately track water usage, and really it's for the irrigation usage that people have. And then the lead line service replacement program, which is a requirement under DOE that we start actually making those improvements to get any lead line fixtures on our service lines out of the system within the next, I believe, 5 to 6 years. Next page. Okay, for the sewer system budget changes, not a whole lot of changes on this one. The main reason is a reduction in the debt service. It's also offset by the costs and salaries and benefits. So there's not a whole lot of change to what we are proposing in that budget. For our capital projects, some major ones that are proposed in this budget cycle is our Rainier Ridge Pump Station rehab and replacement. And then we have a fairly significant annual repair and replacement program for our pipelines. And then continuing on with our I&I study. So that's that infiltration. And I lost what the other I is. I apologize. Infiltration and inflow into the sewer system. And those are the major projects for sewer. Next slide. So storm, again, not too many changes in the storm budget. The main changes that you see is, again, a reduction in debt services and a reduction in transfers to the capital fund. So funds come in on the operating side, we transfer out to capital for what we need. And then all of that is also offset by the increase in salaries and benefits. So major capital projects in the storm project or in the storm fund this year will be a work on our North Airport area improvements. So within the airport, we have several ponds that are actually storm ponds for the city's facility. And as you can imagine, open water ponds next to a runway is not necessarily the best situation for safety of the runway. So we have been working to to see what we can do to change some of that pond configuration to reduce some of the concerns for the airport, as well as reduce the maintenance requirements for the storm utility itself on those ponds. D Street Southeast storm improvements is another major project that we have. And then we also, again, have our annual repair and replacement program within that program. And then the vegetative sorting facility that we are looking for property area. We currently use Jacobson Tree Farm, but eventually Daryl's going to want to turn that into an actual park. So we are looking for other property where we can perform those actions of that vegetative sorting. And that really reduces our cost for disposal of material. When we can actually sort out that material, let it dry out, and then dispose of it as dry material and separate it into its components. For Metro, the only note for that one is the only reason that we have an increase is because there is an increase in the rates that are set by King County. So this, again, is just a pass-through from our customers to King County to pay for treatment of our sewage system. That wraps up our utilities. Questions on the utilities?
Questions, Council? Deputy Mayor DeCoursey.
Thank you, Mayor. Ingrid, on the lead service line replacement, it mentions 1,000 service lines with a lead gooseneck connection. Are the lines themselves lined or lead as well as the gooseneck connection?
No, they are not. It is basically just that gooseneck connection, and it's only on certain fittings within a certain time period. So we've estimated how many we think we have in the system, but until we actually expose that fixture, which is the fixture that connects it from the main to the service line, we won't know whether it actually has any lead in it or not.
Okay. So when we do our water testing, do we have any detectable levels of lead that are showing in our testing?
We do not.
Good. Okay.
And keep in mind that for the fitting that we're talking about, the amount of lead that's in that fixture is still below the drinking water requirements. This is something that because of other situations in other parts of the nation, that this has become a requirement for us to go and look and try to replace these fixtures. We have not seen an issue with lead in our system at all.
Good. That's good to hear. Thank you very much.
Councilmember Jayraj.
Hi, Ingrid, again. So my question is regarding the filtration system. Where is it being done? I know you just said that we don't have one in the city.
Are you talking about the I&I program?
What is that?
The inflow and infiltration, so that's where you have groundwater and or surface water entering into the sewer system?
Our drinking water is what I was.
Okay, so our drinking water, we have treatment facilities within the city. We actually have 2 corrosion control facilities, as well as most of our pump stations and well locations have treatment, depending upon what the water consistency is at that location for how we've obtained that. So whether that's water coming out of the spring or whether that's water coming out of wells, we do testing on that to determine what kind of treatment is necessary and then have a plan for how we handle that water.
So we do have, okay. And then the I&I, what's happening with that?
So I&I, so what inflow and infiltration means is when you have excess surface water or groundwater seeping into your sewage system, you're basically taking capacity away from that sewer system. And we're basically paying King County to treat water that doesn't need to be treated. So what you want to do if you have significant I&I, you would want to reduce that and look at what does that mean? Does that mean additional pipe replacement or other improvements in the system to reduce that inflow and infiltration? What we're currently doing is studying our system to determine how much inflow and infiltration do we actually have? And if we do have significant amounts, where do we have those amounts? And then what is that improvement that might be necessary to reduce those?
Okay. All right. Thank you, Ingrid.
Mm-hmm.
Deputy Mayor DeCoursey.
Thank you, Mayor. Just a comment to our newest council members. When our pandemic is over and we're allowed to go out and travel again, I would encourage you to contact Ingrid and do a tour of our facilities. Councilmember Traumano and I did that a few years ago. And I have to tell you, with our staff that's involved in our water treatment programs, our sewer programs, and all combined, it's an impressive operation, and our facilities are even more impressive when you see how those operations are conducted. So just a little bit of food for thought for future opportunities.
And I'm more than happy to take council members out for a tour of our facilities.
Okay.
Okay. So next up is the airport. So the airport's responsible for all the maintenance of the city-owned facilities, including the hangars, the tie-down spaces, parking, the office buildings, the runway, the taxiways, and the aviation fuel at our airport. And in addition, they also are responsible for management of the commercial and hangar tenants on the site as well. There is also a capital component to the airport, and that is major improvements that we make out at the airport. The airport management also includes an airport advisory board that meets regularly to discuss operations and issues, opportunities and changes at the airport and make recommendations to council on those items. Some accomplishments that we've done over this last 2-year cycle is we completed the transition from a contract management into in-house management. And I have to say that Tim and his team have done a fantastic job on that transition. And the airport is looking and showing that improvement in bringing that in-house. We also completed the runway extension this year. And then we are nearly complete with an update to the strategic business plan with our airport advisory board. Going forward into 21 and 22, some of the goals that we have is to address the obstructions within the flight path of the airport with adjacent properties in the FAA, so that would allow us to modify the night flying restrictions at the airport. And we also want to work with FAA to determine how to create a viable instrument approach for the airport. We've heard from our customers out there that those are 2 significant items that they would love to see some improvements at the airport for. So budget highlights, the fluctuations within the budget for this are really attributed to identification of a potential bond issuance in 2021 for capital improvement on the airport. And this would be to bring in additional hangar space at the airport. We currently have a wait list of over 50 to 60 people at any one time waiting for hangars. And so we have a strong need for that. Whether we find the need to actually issue that bond or not will depend upon some current conversations going on with a developer who is interested in developing the south end of the airport. So depending upon how those conversations go, whether we issue those bonds or not, that may or may not happen, but we wanted to include it here. So regardless of what happens, we have the ability to potentially develop out the airport. In 2019, we also spent a significant amount of time with the Airport Advisory Board reviewing our capital facilities plan for the airport and did a major overhaul of the capital facilities plan. And so what you're seeing in the plan for the airport for the next 6 years is reflective of that discussion with the Airport Advisory Board and the recommendations of what they wanted to see us focus on for improvements out at the airport. And that includes a continued focus on repair and replacement for our aging facilities that are out there and looking at how we can extend the life of those facilities. Again, new hangar facilities, enclosing some of our open T hangars. And then we also identified with FAA this last year a runway and taxiway rehab, which also would include completing the runway safety area grading project. So that is grading out the area at the south end of the airport on the property that we're currently in the process of purchasing from King County Metro. And included with that would also be the precision approach path indicator. For program improvements, this is really housekeeping for our program improvement for the airport. In 2018, when we were developing the budget for 2019 and 2020, since we were going from a consultant-run airport into an in-house run airport, we made many assumptions on what the budget need was going to be. Over the last 2 years, we've done budget amendments to bring that more in line with what's actually needed. And so the program improvement request is basically bringing us into line for 21 and 22 to be in line with what those budget adjustments in 2019 and 2020 have actually been, which shows a slight increase over what the original 2020 budget that was developed in 2018 was. And then we have one additional piece in that program improvement, which is to purchase a replacement for our FODBOS. FODBOS is the foreign object debris. And that's all airport talk. So that is for removing debris on the runway, which is very critical for the safety of the runway. As you can imagine, that little debris flying up and getting into the planes is a concern. And so our current FODBOS is at the end of its useful life. And so we really need to replace that. So that is part of the equipment improvement that is included in that request. And with that, any questions?
Questions, council? Deputy Mayor DeCoursey.
Thank you, Mayor. And Ingrid, thank you for teaching us a new term tonight.
You're welcome.
On the adjacent properties and working with FAA on the obstructions, can you give us an example of what that is and what the restrictions are?
Sure. So several of them are actually trees that have grown into the airspace. And so we need to work with the property owners to either remove the tree, top the tree, but get it out of that airspace. We have one property where we believe that they have made some adjustments to their HVAC system on the top of their building, which has now penetrated into the airspace. And so we'll need to work with them to actually get a light placed on that, so that an indicator light. We have one city street light that is now penetrating that airspace that we need to put a light on. But it's basically things like that and some other signs in the area that with some changes in how that surfacing was done for the obstructions, it's in the path for that obstructions for us to get the night restrictions reduced.
Great, thank you.
So,
and with the airport runway extensions, what types of traffic are we seeing now compared to what we saw with the shorter runway?
That's an interesting question. So we just finished that runway probably about a month and a half ago.
Right.
And I do have Tim on the phone tonight. So I don't know, Tim, if you have any specifics about what you're seeing in increased traffic. COVID, it's also a little unusual as well for this year. We've actually seen some increase just simply from the fact that people have time to go do flying because it's socially distant. So, Tim, I don't know if you have anything.
We haven't seen a significant change. Ingrid noted correctly. There's certainly been an uptick in operations, but we haven't seen larger aircraft or a different category of aircraft come in since the extension. And honestly, with just an increase of 400 feet, it is really just improves the safety margin for the current fleet mix of aircraft that currently operate on the airport.
Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Trout Manuel.
My question is either to Tim or Ingrid, but Ingrid, you mentioned something about 50 to 60 waiting for hangars. Do we have the space to build more hangars out there?
We have space to build hangars. It's more of an issue about the funding to build the hangars. So we have quite a bit of space. And if you can recall back to our master planning for the airport, we have several locations that we identified for development of the airport to add hangar space. And then several of the people on that wait list are actually waiting for enclosed hangars. So while we have open T hangars, they're not necessarily interested in that. They're looking for an enclosed hangar, which is why we see an important push for the next biennium is to figure out how can we enclose some of those existing open T hangars and take advantage of that demand that's there.
Wow, I didn't realize our little airport was that busy. That's awesome to hear. Thank you, Ingrid.
Any other questions? All right.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you, Ingrid. So we'll wrap up with our last enterprise fund, which is solid waste. To give a quick review of what the solid waste fund does, we manage the solid waste hauler contract. So we actually have 2 of them currently in the city and with both Waste Management and Republic. And we also manage in-house the waste reduction and recycling programs. So we work, in addition to having the waste reduction and recycling programs, we work very closely with our solid waste haulers to have the like the spring cleaning pickup that has been delayed or postponed this year. But those reduction and recycling programs are programs that we work on in-house. So our 2019-2020 accomplishments, we have goals for our recycling and composting diversion rates for both residential as well as residential and commercial combined. And our diversion rate for the combined commercial and residential exceeded our goal. We had a 30% diversion rate for the combined customer type. And then for residential only, we had a 49% diversion rate. And our goals for 21 and 22 are to be 50% or more. Our significant 21-22 goals really is getting our waste management contract or our solid waste contract renewed. So you may recall about a month ago, Joe Nelson, the utility billing manager, brought to the council kind of an update on where we were at with the RFP process. Our existing contract, we are in the second half. So we are in a 7-year contract with Waste Management, and it has 2 2-year extensions on it. And we are in the final year of that second 2-year extension. And we need a new contract by October of next year. And as Joan had mentioned in the group, explaining a lot of to the group about a month ago, really the benefits with getting a new updated solid waste contract in place. But our major goal is to get all of the new contract provisions in place and coordinate, get all of the accounts transferred over to Waste Management. We have a small portion of the city that is not being served by Waste Management, and getting that small little area transferred over so all of our citizens are being served by the same company. So that really kind of leads in the transfer of that that agreement and a new contract really brings us right to our budget highlights and the budget changes. You can see really it's just moderate increases for 2021, $267,000. That is just attributed to staffing, to our just a small contract increase with our existing waste management contract. We have a very significant increase of $1.8 million in 2022. That will be the first full year under our new contract. And we knew when we were going out for an RFP that we were going to see a pretty significant jump in costs for really a couple of reasons. There have been a lot of new labor contracts that have been put into place and negotiated since in the last 10 years since our original waste management contract was signed back in 2011. And so a lot of that cost increase is reflecting those labor cost increases, as well as our RFP is asked for all new trucks, energy or for natural energy trucks, as well as new bins for all of our customers. So garbage and recycling bins. And then the third component to the reason why there is an increase is we're having a slight change in how our arrangements with waste management will run. So currently we do the billing and customer service, and we relay any customer service changes onto waste management for their work crews on the ground actually collecting solid waste. We are going to be entering in what we call a billing agent agreement with our new contract, where the contractor is actually going to be doing all the billing and customer service on our behalf. And the goal behind that really is to provide a more seamless service for customers so they don't feel like they are being passed around. So the agency that they receive a bill from is the same place that they can call if they have questions on their bill and or questions about the service that they've been receiving or concerns about the service they've been receiving. So there's a staffing cost associated as being shifted from the city to waste management, and that's part of why we see a large increase in 2022.
Councilmember Trout Manuel has a question.
Jamie, I don't have that solid waste pages in my book. 385 is the airport.
Okay, well then let me get you the updated number. It's under finance and it is page 97.
Okay.
The other end of the book, I'm sorry.
Okay, I got it. Thank you.
Any other questions about solid waste? Okay, so that completes all of our business type activity funds. All of our proprietary funds we've talked about all of those. And then there's just three kind of extra funds, our fiduciary funds. And as a reminder, with fiduciary funds, it's really money that we're holding, that we're in charge of, but it's not really our money. So we're holding it and we're paying it out either as we're required to through interlocal agreements or state law. And there's three main fiduciary funds that we have. The first is the South King Housing and Homeless Partners. If you recall, Director Tate actually already talked about this program yesterday. It is the actual program activity takes place in the general fund. We collect all of the money from our partnering agencies into this agency fund. So we have a set amount of money that we receive. That money comes into this agency fund. We collect about $251,000 a year from all of those agencies. And then that money gets transferred to the general fund to support Jeff's program in the general fund. The second fiduciary fund is our fire pension fund. This is where we pay all of the fire pensions for our pre-LEF 1 firefighters who have since long retired. And the fund is well funded. We do an actuarial study, or required to do an actuarial study every 2 years to make sure that we have enough funding for ongoing needs to fund those pension payments into the future. We are currently well funded. We do receive a small portion of tax from the state each year from fire insurance premiums. And we put that money into the pension plan and let that pay for our pension payments. And we currently pay about $180,000 to $185,000 a year to those pre-Left One fire pensioners and or their surviving beneficiaries. And then our last one is our cemetery endowment fund. A percentage of our lot sales from the cemetery fund, about $45,000 a year, is transferred into the cemetery endowment fund. And how an endowment fund works, the principal can't be spent. So that $45,000 that we transfer annually would be considered the principal. That money is restricted and cannot be spent. The interest earned on that principal can be used for the preservation and capital in the cemetery fund. We don't currently have anything budgeted for 21-22. We're just allowing that fund balance to accumulate a little bit. Currently, at the end of 2022, there will be $2.1 million in that cemetery endowment fund. However, only $248,000 of that is actually unrestricted, and the other remaining $1.8 million is the endowment itself and is unspendable. Any questions on the fiduciary funds? Okay. Well, guys, we're in the home stretch. So I just wanted to do a really quick recap of all the numbers that we've seen so far. So this will take us actually back to the very first part of our first workshop, which is the general fund summary. So this is a summary of our beginning fund balance, all the revenues that we are anticipating to receive over the next 2 years, and the expenditures and the programs that we're asking council to adopt and approve over the next 2 years. And as a result, that ending fund balance of $10.5 million in the first year and an ending fund balance of $6.8 million in the second year. Just to point out in that expenditure column, because that's what we're asking really the council to adopt and approve, is that spending authority, to highlight that there's very little to no change in what we're asking for in this biennium over from what we have had in previous budgets. There's been a few small changes, and those general fund new requests are then listed right below that. So, and we've gone through all of these requests throughout the last several days with our department presentations, but the total new requests are $458,000 in the first year, and then excluding the B&O tax revenue of $265,000 in the second year. Then a summary of all of the other funds, because this is actually the first time you've seen a big picture snapshot of all of the other funds since we've reviewed all those other funds on an individual basis. The rest of the budget that we're asking the council to consider is we'd have an ending fund balance for all of those other funds combined of $99.1 million at the end of 2021 and $82.2 million at the end of 2022. And embedded in that, though, are the capital projects and the capital programs that are associated with the utilities and the airport. Those are all the capital that Ingrid had mentioned, particularly related to bond issuances. That is reflected in these overall numbers that you see in this top chart. In addition to that capital, I've included the new program requests for all the other funds. So this includes the new program requests for the internal service funds as well as the utility funds. So that's where I'm going to bring us to, before I go actually into the next steps beyond today's meeting, I wanted to remind all of you that really the purpose of these last 3 days is for you to have an opportunity to go through with a fine-tooth comb the preliminary budget that the mayor is presenting to you. And it's your opportunity to provide any discussion or contribution and what's your input and what you would like to see the published preliminary budget look like. Because October 26th is when we would be set to file our completed preliminary budget that the city clerk would publish. So before we can do that, we need to make sure that we have considered all of your input and we make sure that we get council's feedback incorporated into that preliminary budget. So before I move on to the next steps, I would like to open it up to the group and ask them, do you have questions about this budget? What kind of recommendations do you have? And if you are comfortable with moving forward with presenting the preliminary budget as you've seen it so far.
Council, any questions or comments? Councilmember Brown.
Thank you, Your Honor. I just want to compliment you, the mayor, and your staff. The materials here are dense and extensive and very professional. And it looks like a really nice balance between restraint, dealing with the budget hit that we're taking, but not going too far backwards in the services we provide to the citizens. So I feel pretty good about what I've seen so far.
Thank you, Councilmember Brown. Deputy Mayor DeCoursey.
Thank you, Mayor. I definitely appreciate the work that the directors and Jamie put into our budgets, especially during this time. We don't receive budgets with fluff. We receive budgets that are realistic and straight to the point, and within our challenges we have with some of our revenue sources as well on that. I don't have any specific comments or concerns other than what we've already talked about and some of the answers we received and some we'll still receive. I guess my only comment, and Jamie, I mentioned this again the other day, was looking at a time when we can get a little bit more in-depth discussion and together with all the council members to look at the potential of the B&O and where we go with that and how we address that. And you mentioned we could do this budget without actually getting into that point directly, but I think sooner than later would be more beneficial. And then not this year, but perhaps next year, I would encourage us to begin a discussion on the out years when we start dipping below the line and at least have some conversations on some direction we might need, should, or could take on that.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. That is part of our long-term plan. Councilmember Trout-Manuel.
I have to agree with Councilmember Brown and Deputy Mayor DeCoursey. I really like what's been presented to us, and I want to thank you, Mayor Nancy, and your staff for always really looking at all the fine lines of where we can, save money and also make sure that we're serving our community the way we should be. So I have no problems with going forward, and I have to agree with Mr. DeCoursey on going into depth with the B&O tax. That's something that we definitely really need to look at. So thank you again for, I have to say I was invited to be at the Federal Way Council meeting last night, and they reviewed their budget. And this, comparing to what they did last night, I have to say I'm very proud with what you're presenting us. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Stearns.
Thank you, Your Honor. Yeah, I just wanted to say, wow, this is a lot. I think what struck me was, really how well it was presented. There's so much in there, and for the level of, I think, comprehension and really mastery that your staff, the city staff, has over this. I mean, it just helps me so much, as a new council member, go through this and have confidence, and it's really very impressive, and I'm so grateful to the staff for being able to present this in a way that makes sense. So thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Stearns. Councilmember Jayraj.
Thank you, Your Honor. I just want to thank Mayor and the directors and Jamie for putting a very in-depth. What?
I said, I've heard a couple of you say, I want to thank the directors and Jamie. Jamie is a director.
Jamie's a special director. Anyway, want to thank you for the in-depth work that you guys have done, and there's a lot of information here, and it was fairly easy to follow, and I really appreciate that, even though I'm not very good at finance, but I'm starting to learn a lot from you guys, and I really appreciate that. That's all I have, but I do want to thank the whole team. Thank you.
Thank you. And Councilmember Jayraj, I was just giving you a bad time. I do appreciate all of you and your kind comments. It is an intense process, as you all have lived through now. Some of you as brand new council members, this can be one of the most overwhelming things that you do, right? I mean, budget is one of the most important things of your responsibilities, and it can be overwhelming. Just the sheer fact of the 2 budget books can be overwhelming to pick it up and think that you need to read through it and take it all in. And I appreciate your dedication to this process. 3 nights of going through this at 2 or 3 hours at a time is really to be commended for you, because it means that you do care enough and you have asked great questions. And the fact that you are paying enough attention to even be able to ask those questions speaks volumes about your dedication to this process. I also want to express my deep appreciation and admiration to our directors and their teams. Each of the directors and their teams go through a very intense process that started several months ago to put together the budget for the next biennium, and that is amidst COVID. When we're looking at what are we doing in 2020, what should our recommendations be brought forward to you for what we're doing in 2020, as well as Jamie having that crystal ball, Jamie and her team of having that crystal ball of trying to determine just where we're going to be. And I know you all understand that that is no small task, but our directors and their teams have done a phenomenal job of keeping costs contained, only asking for additions if there is a significant need. And we went through that test as a team as well before we brought this budget forward to council. And so I can tell you how very proud I am of the work that has been done by this entire group, by all of you that are on the line tonight, those of you that couldn't make it to join us tonight for whatever reasons, but I am incredibly proud and humbled that you all take this much attention to detail to ensure that we are providing the very best for the residents that we serve. Are there any other questions or comments before us this evening?
If there weren't any more comments about the preliminary budget as we've presented over the last couple of days, I did want to just point out, and I'm going to send this PowerPoint deck back out to the council as soon as we're off this call, but just to give you an idea of the next steps. And as I had mentioned, the city clerk will be filing or publishing the preliminary budget on October 26th. We will have a study session that evening also, and we will do just a preliminary budget overview. It'll be really quick. It's going to be the high level numbers and information that we've just reviewed over the last couple of days, and then a major revenue forecast and property tax presentation, which is something that we would need to do every year as we prepare for our property tax levy that needs to be adopted by November 30th. And then we'll follow up with those presentations at the November 2nd council meeting. We'll have a public hearing on both the biennial budget as well as the property tax ordinance. Those are required public hearings by RCW. And then on November 16th, barring no changes from any public comment or anything that the council has made, which I would not expect that would to happen that late in the game, but if it were to happen, we would have a final public hearing on November 16th on the final budget itself, with an adoption of both the property tax ordinance that evening and the final 21-22 biennial budget.
Okay, Councilmember Trout Manuel.
Yes, I just want to give Jamie do a shout out to Jamie, because she also is fairly new with us, and she has come on like a pro, and it's just so good to have you describe and explain everything to us like you've been with us for a long time. So thank you for such a good job. And Nancy, after what you said, I gave you a amen, because we do need an amen for going through this. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Councilmember J. Raj.
Thank you, Your Honor. Jamie, Special Director Jamie. So what kind of increases are we looking at for next year? I mean, I saw the numbers, but compared to this year and next year, what are we looking at?
Are you talking revenues or
revenues?
That is actually, it was in the first presentation. It is roughly, it's kind of, it depends by fund. You know, I look at these numbers all day long, but I think sometimes all the numbers start to get all.
Yeah, I totally get it. I totally get it. Yeah.
So our total, now this is just our 2020 estimate. So this is our kind of our adjusted revenue estimate for 2020 is $72.9 million. And that is compared to what we're budgeting in 2021 of 72.8 and $81.9 million. And that really is mostly attributed to a lot of those recessionary figures and trending that we had talked about with some of our major revenue sources. And then the big bump up in 2022 then related to the B&O tax.
Okay. All right, Jamie, that was it. I really appreciate your dedication and all the work that you put in.
Thank you. It's everybody. To reiterate what the mayor has said, it's really truly a group effort, and all of the work that my team and the other directors have done is the only reason we've been able to make it here tonight.
Yep, I agree.
Council, any other questions or comments before we call it an evening? All right, directors on the call, any other comments from any of you? Okay, and I see that Kevin Fuhr and Bob Brooks are on the call, and they are integral to this process as well. So thank you very, very much for all of the work. Bob's spreadsheets are legendary. They have 50 bajillion tabs on them, and he knows the links on all of them. So if you ever want to spend a week, go ahead and pull one of those and go through it line by line, cell by cell. All right, since I see no other comments pending, we will call this adjourned, and thank you very much, council and directors and team, for all of your work. Have a wonderful evening.